Hello, welcome to St. Helen's, and I'm glad to be with you here again for this little tour of our sanctuary, which has been remodeled in the last year as we celebrated our 100th anniversary as a parish here at St. Helen's in Vero Beach. And I know you have more important questions like when is the church going to reopen again? I do not know that yet, but as soon as I know, you'll know. The first thing we want to talk about is the remodeled sanctuary has a great deal of artwork in it, as well as the construction of the high altar and the baldacchino. The baldacchino is that domed structure that resides over the tabernacle in the middle. The basic vision of the sanctuary in nearly any Catholic church is this. It's a representation of heaven coming from the book of Revelation. So if you read the book of Revelation, which I'm sure you've done, you'll know that a lot of the things you see in our sanctuaries come from the book of Revelation. Now, we don't have it here because we ran out of money. Normally, you'd have a gate here in the sanctuary, and then during the Mass, the gates would be open. Now, that comes from the book of Revelation because heaven has gates, and they're thrown open as God reveals himself to us. And they'd be thrown open during the Mass to say that this is now heaven, and this is earth, and now the two can meet each other. We can go back and forth. The priest will go back and forth between heaven and earth. And during the Mass, this spot becomes a little bit of heaven. And that's why all the symbolism that's here is meant to represent what John, St. John, sees in the book of Revelation as he sees his vision of heaven. So all these things here represent that. There is in heaven an altar, a gold altar. Now ours is covered with the cloths for Easter, but the gold altar has underneath it martyrs are underneath the altar. And that's why in Catholic churches we always have the relics of the martyrs underneath our altar. If you go to some old churches in this country or in Europe, you'll see that they actually have a body, someone who died for the faith, a saint. Their body is actually in glass underneath the altar as a representation of St. John's vision of heaven. Now let's move closer to the artwork in the sanctuary. What I'd like you to do is take a look at the ceiling. There are 4 major pieces of artwork in the ceiling, and those are the images of the angels. Those are seraphim. And what you see is the angel with a halo, and there's 2 wings above, 2 wings below, and 2 wings on the side. And that is the 6-winged seraphim. The seraphim are the ones who surround the altar and bring the offerings of the people up to God. So they come to heaven to take our offerings from the altar, specifically in the temple in Jerusalem, but certainly for us as well to take our offerings. And those angels then take those offerings to God's altar in heaven, or so St. John was able to see. Now we come here to the major structure, the high altar and the baldacchino. A baldacchino is a fancy word for a dome on these pillars, and they were over significant things, the thrones of kings, for example, or tabernacles, as you can see right here. But in St. John's vision of heaven, what he has is the temple, which is in heaven. See, this would be the temple, a representation of the temple. That's what the dome and baldacchino represents. And enthroned in the center of the temple is God, right? Jesus, God, is enthroned in the center of the temple. And the Ark of the Covenant is also in the temple as well, represented by the tabernacle, of course. And as God's presence is in the temple in heaven, represented by his very presence on earth, the Eucharist, the image of our Lord Jesus on the cross, enthroned in his act of divine mercy, the book of Revelation reminds us that God is surrounded by thrones, and on those thrones are the white-robed saints, those who are washed in the blood of the Lamb. And so people ask sometimes, who are these images? Well, I'll tell you, these represent some of the saints who, of course, are in heaven with our Lord and God. We have first here the Blessed Mother Mary, of course, who sits at the right hand of our Lord Jesus. Now here we have another saint, very important. is St. Peter, who holds keys, and those are the keys to the kingdom of heaven. As the gospel reminds us, our Lord Jesus gave to St. Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and that which he bound on earth was bound in heaven, and that which he loosed on earth was loosed in heaven. So a representation of St. Peter as one of those saints who are enthroned with Jesus in the temple. Over here, on the other side of the tabernacle, we have St. Paul, the great evangelist. Most of the New Testament was written by St. Paul, and he carries a sword as his symbol. And then, of course, as we come here, we have St. Helen, who is the patroness of our church, our parish, St. Helen's. So it's meant to represent God enthroned in the temple in heaven, and he's surrounded by the other saints and martyrs who are in heaven with him. That's what the high altar represents. So thus we have here heaven, and in the center of heaven is the temple, enthroned with God. But we're not done there, because on either side of the baldacchino is more representation of heaven, more the garden. Notice on both sides, the water flows from the temple, and it flows that way. And when we go to the other side, you'll see that the water goes from the temple, and it goes that way, because those life-giving waters flow from the temple, which is where God's presence is, and it flows through the garden, and everywhere the water touches, it brings life. God, who is the author of life. And it's mimicked on the other side exactly, and it's meant to be an exact image of each other. It's like a garden, and we have the 6 sheep on this side, we have 6 on the other. They are all facing inwards toward God. Those sheep represent on both sides together the 12 apostles, of course, the great followers of Jesus. You'll see the trees on both sides, here and on the other side, are the same. Everything is the same on both sides. There is nothing haphazard or chaotic about what you see in this image of heaven, this image of a garden, because everything is ordered. Nothing is chaotic. Nothing is by accident. Everything is ordered, this garden in heaven. Thus the trees here and the sheep here and the water are mimicked the exact same on the other side. Behind the temple from the garden, a mountain rises from both sides to peak behind the baldacchino. And of course, the mountain is the privileged place of encounter with God. Another thing you'll see here is if you look at the clouds, you'll see that the clouds, unlike our usual clouds, which are white, these clouds are blue and red. They are blue and red because in early Christian artwork, when they were trying to depict heaven, they would often use regular pastoral scenes like this, trees and water and sheep and mountains. But to make sure you knew it wasn't just a regular scene of sheep or trees or mountains, they would do something different, like they would paint the clouds blue and red so that you would know this is not a regular earthly picture you're looking at. You are looking at a representation of paradise, a representation of heaven as well. All of these things are designed. All of these things are designed specifically as we look at the sanctuary to remind us of heaven, that this is a heavenly reality here. God's presence is here. And when we come here to celebrate the Mass, when we're able to again, at least for the people, the priests have been celebrating Mass continually, God is here. This is a little bit of heaven right here. Right here. And just so you know, you can see right behind me here, a great big hole in the wall. That goes, I hear, all the way to China. I'm not sure. No, that is some technological marvel that they are currently constructing, and that hole should be covered, they promised me, in a couple of weeks. That is not part of our image of heaven there. So I'm glad to have this opportunity to share with you just a few things that are about our sanctuary art. If you have any questions, put them in the Facebook thing that you use, and I'll try to answer them later. God bless you.